Welcome to Season 2 of Healing the Tigress, a podcast of conversations and stories on Asian American Pacific Islander maternal mental health. We are your hosts, Peggy, a perinatal mental health therapist,
and Jasmine, a clinical pharmacist who is perinatal mental health certified. As Taiwanese American mothers who lived through postpartum depression and anxiety, we felt like we didn't hear about other AAPI mothers struggling with their mental health in new motherhood. But we knew it couldn't just be us.
So we created this podcast because we hope that sharing these stories can start to break the stigma of mental health in our community and help heal the inner tigress in all AAPI parents.
Hello, everyone. Today we have a very special guest with us, a big supporter of Healing the Tigress from day one, and a good friend I've known since we were both Chinese summer camp counselors to grade school kids during the summer. And so today we're going to be talking about a topic we haven't covered yet on this podcast, which is adoption.
So we have with us today Katy Wang, an early childhood educator for the past 15 years and currently an assistant principal at a school in the Bay Area. Thanks, Katy, for agreeing to talk to us today about your parenting journey, your soon-to-be parenting journey. Would you mind sharing a little bit with the listeners about your cultural background and also what a PANK, P-A-N-K, I've never heard of this before, a PANK is, as you fondly like to call yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me today. I'm really excited to be here. My cultural upbringing is I'm Taiwanese American, just like the two of you. I was born in the United States, but spent a good chunk of my early childhood days in Taiwan, living with my parents, my extended family, and then we moved back to the United States because of my parents' jobs and things like that, and then situated in the Bay Area where I've been pretty much most of my life. Like you said, I'm an early childhood educator. I've been doing it for a very long time. What a PANK is, it's actually my current favorite title. It stands for Professional Aunt No Kids. And my husband would be what we fondly call a punk. Professional Uncle No Kids.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, I like that. Like a different spin on dink, right?
I've heard of dink.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
So our friends like to say that we're dink panks and dink punks because we are double income, no kids, professional aunt, no kids.
That's a fun way, I think, of framing that, right? And, you know, one of the things I've known about you over the years of being friends is that you've always loved kids. I mean, we were camp counselors, right, to the rowdiest little kids, and we both thoroughly enjoy taking care of kids. And it really didn't surprise me that you actually went into childhood education for your career. But I think what did surprise me was when I found out that you had decided you did not want kids. And given your huge love for children, you know, how affectionate you are to all of your friends' kids, it kind of blew my mind a little bit. But at the same time, I feel like, you know, you really opened my eyes to a different perspective. And I truly appreciate all these discussions we've had over it. So can you just walk our listeners through what led you to the decision to be child-free for many years, actually?
Yeah. So my child-free journey actually started on the other side of that fence where I was absolutely sure that I wanted children. There was like a non-negotiable. So when my husband and I actually first started dating, really early on when we got serious, I was like, we need to have a talk. Do you want kids or not? Because if you don't want kids, stop wasting my time. This is like not going to go anywhere. And he at the time was like, oh, I'm not sure. We were in our like early 20s. We were really young. He wasn't sure. And I was like, well, you need to be sure if you want to stay with me. This is an absolute. And then, you know, he was obviously like, you know, obviously I don't know. I'm open to it, etc. And then kind of as I progressed in my career, I just realized how exhausting it is to have children, and not just physically, but the emotional exhaustion. And I think for me, it was doing my 9 to 5. And then the thought of that being also my 5 to 9 seemed really, really daunting and felt really daunting, especially in my like late 20s and early 30s. It just felt like a lot. And if I work with really young children, like between 2 and 6, So those are kind of, I think, some of the toughest years emotionally for parents. And as an educator, it kind of felt like I was parenting alongside these parents. A lot of the children at my school spend more time with me during their weeks than they do with their parents, like more of their waking hours. Because if you have two working parents, you pick up your child at the end of the day, you go home, you maybe go to the park, or you have 30 minutes of playtime, and then you eat dinner, and then it's bath and bed. And then you wake up and it's, you're with them for maybe an hour, maybe an hour and a half, and then you drop them off at school, right? So it just felt really daunting, and just everything. Watching the parents that I work with struggle and then watching my friends through their struggles made me feel like it wasn't a journey that felt right for me. Yeah.
And I think that it's interesting that probably because you're an educator and you see this a lot because you work with these families and from a young age too. Like I never even considered the whole 9 to 5, then 5 to 9 job, but you already had that. You could already see that that's what life was going to look like for you if you had kids. So there's that sort of self-awareness as well, which I think I didn't realize until I became a parent myself.
Yeah, I will say I feel really lucky that I have such a unique perspective and I have the opportunity to see it through such a different lens. And I mean, my husband and I, when, things got serious and we got engaged and got married, there were conversations that we had about how, without a doubt, I would be the primary caregiver. Like our child would likely go to school where I worked because it makes the most sense, so that means I would literally be with our child in the same space 24/7, and there is no disconnect. And I was like, I can't. That seems, I am sure I would love our hypothetical child, but holy cow, I need a little bit of space, and he was like, yeah, fair, and that was a big draw at the moment of like, this is too much.
And he swung with you, and
he
swung the other way.
I mean,
okay.
Yeah, he did. Right before we got engaged, we kind of made the decision that we really enjoyed our lives the way it was, traveling, being like right before we got engaged, our friends started having kids. So then we started kind of falling into the role of like auntie and uncle, and we really enjoyed that. And we also really enjoyed being able to show up for our friends. My partner has to work. Can you come over and help me with bedtime? Absolutely. This is the day before like Instacart and things like that. Can you pick up these groceries for me? Can you do this Target run for me? Absolutely. We have so much flexibility, and being able to show up for our friends, that was like a way that filled both of our buckets immensely. And I don't think we realized that until we were able to do that. So yes, he swung with me. It was great. I feel really blessed. I can't say the same for our family and friends. They didn't necessarily swing as quickly as we did the other way. But yeah.
Oh, I wish I had an Auntie Katy in my life a little earlier on.
That's been a common saying recently. A lot of our friends will say, we need an Auntie Katy. She's like a fairy godmother. And I'm like, I just really enjoy showing up at like birthday parties, dance recitals. I mean, I think recently I've been to 5 dance recitals in like a 7-week period, because every little girl in our lives decides that they want to dance.
So there's a huge value in being a PANK or a punk, even though you are now, as we'll learn later, like changing your mind about it. I think there is not enough people kind of celebrating women or women or men or whatever who are choosing to play this role in children's lives, because we do need that role in children's lives. And most kids might have an aunt or uncle, but a lot of times those aunts and uncles have kids of their own and aren't able to provide that extra level of attention and time that like a PANK or a punk. I'm gonna eat those words up.
It's been so fun being a PANK. I mean, I will regularly play hooky with my nieces and nephews and pick them up from school, and obviously with their parents' permission, right? And we'll like go get ice cream and then go to the park and then go on a dinner date, and then I drop them off at home, or we'll like go shopping, we'll go to Target, we'll do these really fun things. And I think it's brought a light into my life that I never could have envisioned for myself. It's this very unique kind of aspect in adulthood that I don't think everyone gets to experience. Even if you are an aunt or uncle, I think there's this very kind of subset of adults that get this opportunity.
You mentioned before also that, and what would a mental health podcast be without talking about history of depression? But you've mentioned before experience of clinical depression. Can you tell us a little bit more about how your experience with depression also tied into your decision to initially be child-free?
My kind of journey through depression was really, I think some people would argue it was really expected, but I think for me, it wasn't. And I mean, you guys know I have like this huge bubbly personality, and I think you don't, not that there's ever like a poster child for mental health or anything like that, but I am kind of the exact opposite of what you would say. So I think when I realized I had depression and when I was diagnosed with it, it was a huge, like, bitter pill to swallow. And it was one of those moments where for me, it really forced me to realize that I am not an exception to the rule, and it truly can happen to everyone. And for me, it was a really like a situational based. I had lost like a grandmother, and then I had lost another grandmother a few years later, and I hadn't realized how deep those losses would hit me, and that grief and grief, I've learned, isn't like a sprint. It's a marathon, and it's truly something you live with for the rest of your life, and you kind of grow around it. But I didn't realize that, and I was much younger. And then I had a couple of really hard conversations at work, and I had some professional struggles. And then Brian and I's marriage was kind of in this kind of rut, as all relationships kind of, there's ups and downs. And I think it was the perfect storm type of situation. And then shortly after, COVID hit, and that didn't help, and then at the same time I was working full time, I was in school full time. It was just this culmination of things. And I remember the conversation I had with my therapist, and she had said, have you thought about the fact that you could be depressed? And I was like, no, like this can't be. It's just like a really rough time in my life. And I love her. And she gave me probably a good like 3 or 4 sessions before she kind of really forced me to address the elephant in the room. And was like, I think you need to label this and call it what it is. It isn't just you're blue. It isn't just that you're in a rut. It isn't just this. It's truly depression. Then how do we go about treating this and helping you kind of come out on the other side of it? And I remember like my depression, like if you Google this, there's like depression amnesia. And there are serious parts of those years. They feel very foggy. I can't remember parts of it. Like I'm like, oh, I know I went to like this niece or nephew's birthday party, but I can't actually remember what happened if I'm not looking at photos. They feel kind of like created memories and not authentic memories, if that makes sense. And there are moments in there where it doesn't feel like me. And I think the moment it really hit me was, if you know me, like one of my happy places is Disneyland, and I love Disneyland. I remember specifically like standing in line for a ride at Disneyland and feeling just really like indifferent. Like I was at Disneyland with some of like my favorite people, like we were having a great time, but I felt indifferent. Like it didn't matter if I was there or not. And I remember actually standing in line and like pulling out my phone and emailing my therapist and being like, something's wrong. Something truly feels wrong at this point. I don't know what to do, And I think for me, that realization of that I'm like not an exception to the rule, and I'm, I could also be a statistic, also helped me to realize that the perinatal stuff, like postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression, I'm under no pretense that I could be immune to that. Mm-hmm. And my bout with depression and my mental health struggles really put a string on my relationship with my husband. It was really, we talk about it now, and it's still really hard for both of us to talk about. But he says it was really hard watching me and knowing that there was really nothing he could do. He could try to cheer me up. He could book trips for us, take us out to dinner, and do all these fun things. But at the end of the day, it was kind of just a little Band-Aid. It didn't solve anything. He'll talk about how he was like, he knew that traveling made me happy, being with my friends made me happy. So he had me do all these solo trips with like my friends and girls trips and stuff like that. And he said I would come back and I'd be exactly the same. It just like, And I can't even begin to imagine how hard that was on him. And so coming out of that, it only reaffirmed our decision to not have children biologically, because we were like, this isn't worth the risk. It isn't worth risking like losing me or losing our marriage, And I remember there was a point in my depression where I shared with him, there was like suicidal ideation and like the thought of like, well, what would life be like without me? Your life wouldn't be that bad without me. Like their life wouldn't be that bad without me. And so that I think that was really scary for me. It was really scary for him. And no matter how we flipped it, that was never a risk that we could put back on the table. And if that meant like not having kids and taking that card off the table, that felt like a very reasonable thing for us.
The way you and thank you for sharing that. I know it can be really hard to kind of relive some of those memories, but the way that you were describing your depression sounds just like postpartum depression, minus the postpartum. And for you to have been really intentional in thinking, I know enough as being an auntie and watching friends go through it, that having a history of clinical depression can increase my chances of getting postpartum or perinatal depression. For you to actually make this very intentional decision to say like the risk of the biological factors and having a biological child, making a hard decision to say, yeah, no, this is really not the choice for me. I think I hate to say brave. I don't know why, but there's some boldness about being able to be like, wow, I know enough about this to say I have to make this type of decision.
Yeah. I mean, I think the struggle was also like watching my friends, some of my closest friends go through postpartum around the same time. And then also seeing, hindsight's 2020, right? You don't realize that they're struggling with postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression, any of that until they're kind of almost on the other side of it or kind of starting to come out of it. And then you realize, oh my gosh, I've missed you. You were a different person, because it doesn't always just happen overnight. It's kind of the slow change in their personality and their demeanor. And you, even as an outsider and even with the knowledge I had, I couldn't spot it. Does that make sense? And watching that happen to my friends was really heartbreaking. It was really hard to watch, both as like a friend to them and then as an aunt to their kids. It was just really hard.
I thought the same words Peggy had said. I was thinking like intentional. Unfortunately, the word brave. But I mean, I always like to say like, I don't like being called brave for talking about my postpartum depression, because I hate having to be that brave face. I wish it would just be normalized. I wish this would be something we could all talk about easily. But I thought the same things, like, man, everything you just said, like I was like resonating, like, yeah, that's what depression feels like and sounds like. And it's really hard to describe to people who haven't actually been through it. Mm-hmm. But it creeps in and it's hard. Like you said, it's hard to spot. It's invisible, but it's there, and it kind of takes over. It's not you. That's the thing. Like you're sort of like almost like, taken over by something different, right? And to get yourself back, it feels very freeing, but also like scary. Like I don't want to go back to that place. I hope I never have to. So I can understand why you are having had this experience. You're like, I can't put myself at that risk, right? And especially I think when you get to that dark spot where you're thinking about, I don't even want to be, what would it be like if I wasn't even here? And like you said, it's not worth it. It's not worth that for your marriage. It's not worth, putting your body through that when you could have those hormonal changes. The other thing I thought about as you're talking about this, I know we grew up with pretty typical Taiwanese immigrant parents. Okay. So I can only imagine like my own parents' reaction if I told them that either A, I didn't want to get married, or B, I didn't want to have kids. So
double whammy.
Yeah. Right. I mean, you got married. Okay. But
yes.
Did you ever share with your parents that you wanted to be child free? And did you ever explain to them that mental health was kind of a big role in that decision? Because I don't even know how my parents would respond if I gave them that reason.
Yeah. So we shared with both sets of our parents that we are choosing to be child-free. There was shock all around. And for reasons I think similar to kind of what you shared earlier, Jasmine, about how people kind of I'm great with kids. I love being with kids. And so people just kind of assume that, yeah, this is the path that they're going to take. It feels natural, right? And then there's also the cultural, like, you're on this path. There are things that you're supposed to do at the right time. Checklist, right? You went to college. Okay, you've met a good person. You've gotten married. Did you buy a house? Now you have a kid. Like, there's these, right? My parents were surprised. I wouldn't say they were supportive. I wouldn't say they weren't supportive. They were just kind of surprised and shocked. They were like, well, why? And I wasn't comfortable. Not that I wasn't comfortable. I didn't know how to broach the topic of its mental health. So we pretty much were just like, there are so many kids. We took the easy way out. There are so many kids in our lives. We feel very fulfilled. It's so expensive. We live in the Bay Area. Life is really hard. We really enjoy being able to travel and book these spontaneous trips because we found a good deal. There were these kind of easier, superficial answers that we just kind of gave to all of the adults in our lives, like all of the generations above us.
Did they accept that?
I think they accepted it, and then just in the beginning, they pushed a little harder. They're like, oh, well, did you change your mind, etc. And we were just like, nope. And when we first got married, any Asian gathering you go to, they're like, oh, congratulations. So when are you going to have kids? And the first couple of times I asked, I would not respond. I'd be like, oh, we'll see. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to be brave about it. I'm going to shatter these conceived notions. And I'm going to say, we're not having kids. And the looks on some of those like auntie and uncle's faces were like, oh, well, how do I like respond to this answer now? Like, yeah. That's not the response they expect to get. So they're kind of like, oh, okay, well, enjoy, you travel a lot. Like, you could kind of see them trying to like scramble for an answer. Oh, yeah, kids are so expensive. It's okay. Save your money. But it just was interesting to kind of see the different responses. And I think now we're at an age where people no longer ask because it's more taboo. Like, oh, do they not have kids because they're struggling to have kids? Are they like, there's at our age a little bit, there's just that they can't quite ask type of thing. So we've stopped getting questions.
There's something so similar to that experience to the like one and done families. Like, when are you going to have another? When do you have another? And oftentimes it's some like, oh, we'll see until you start to say, we're only just going to have one. And then you get kind of either the, oh, that's good. Yeah, that's a good idea. Kids are tiring. Or the opposite where they're like, are you sure? But look, you're kidding. So it's very similar. Like, there's such similarity with that. I think that's what I love so much about your PANK story is that like, it is very similar to saying, I'm going to choose to only have one, or I'm going to choose to have none. It's that when we had the episode with Shannon, it's everyone's mental health is unique to themselves. And for you, you're like, I've been through the depression. I work with kids 9 to 5 for my mental health. I can't birth a child into this world. And so, yeah, it's similar. It's like negative. There's a lot of that negativity with, oh, you're not having children, or, oh, there's a lot of negativity with, oh, you're only having one child. And they just focus so much on the negative versus the positive, where you're able to say, like, I'm able to be this PANK. What do you think are the best things about being a PANK?
Oh my gosh, where do I start? The best things of being a PANK is having a currently disposable income to buy and do whatever I want with my nieces and nephews, and the parents can't say no because it's my money, my time, and my niece and my nephew. I think some of my favorite things that I've done as a PANK is I've been able to do like trips with some of my nieces and nephews, like girls trips, or like if like vacations line up and things like that. And then when we're on the trip, the parents are like, you've already had ice cream. I'm like, well, Auntie Katie's gonna get ice cream. Do you want another ice cream? Sure. We're all going to go get ice cream, and of course there's like boundaries within I'm not going to feed a child like 10 scoops of ice cream and not, but there's some sort of fun in kind of that. I mean, I think we all grew up with like an adult that kind of spoiled us a little bit. Right. And I really enjoy being able to do that. I hate the saying of like adults saying like their best friend isn't a child because it feels odd. But as a PANK, I truly feel that. I feel like I have some of my best friends and like my nieces and my nephews. My time with them is like they light up my world. You know, being able to share these really cool experiences with them, and also being able to show up for them in situations where like maybe their parents aren't able to show up, or like another person isn't able to show up. And I think for me growing up, I always just had my parents, you know, that immigrant story. Like it was just my immediate family here. We didn't really have extended family here. So anytime we had like a school event or a sporting event, anything like that, it would be one of my parents and not both of my parents, because they couldn't both take off work. And then that was it. I didn't have another adult that would show up. But being able to offer that for the kids in my life, like a school assembly, a 5-minute school play, and being able to show up and for them to see that they have a village that shows up for them beyond like their mom or their dad or their siblings or their grandparents, I think is a really neat experience for them. And for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think actually as like an only child mom, I'm always looking to build up that community, right? Whether it's more relatives or other adult figures in my child's life, like someone like you, I think it's so heartwarming that there are people like that out there. And, you told us that you are a serious auntie to over 15 kids. That's impressive.
Yeah.
And, I've seen you
did the math. That number's wrong. That number's really low. I actually sat with a friend last night, and I think the number's closer to like 20 or 25.
Oh my God.
But I'm like, is that right? I don't know. Cause I was like telling her, I was like, oh, I like told someone that I'm like an auntie to 15 kids, and she's like, that's not right. And I was like,
that's so funny.
Yeah, it is. And she was like, no. And she sat down and like, we wrote it down. I was like, oh yeah, this is like incredibly off. And she's like, yeah, not just by like 1 or 2, you're off by quite
10.
a big amount. I was like, all right, so it's a lot.
I mean, I've seen you do the Disneyland trips with them, the late night setting up birthday balloon garlands, which I know you just recently did. And you're just so much, right? It's very clear that you're very involved in these kids' lives and deeply love their children like their own. So where do you think was there actually a pivotal point in your auntie life when you suddenly thought, because I know we're going to swing the other way now, you thought you actually wanted your own child?
I think there wasn't like one moment. I think it was a culmination of a lot. And I think it was this, I hate to say this, like this feeling of like your biological clock is ticking and like this ship is gonna sail. Like, ooh, like if we don't do it, if we don't choose this is it. Like, are we sure? Are we sure? And then there was this moment as like all of our nieces and nephews are getting a little bit older, and they're getting to be at an age where they're a little bit more interactive. Like they're 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and there's, you can have more adult conversations with them, and they're a little bit more fun. I think it occurred to me that, one, I'm going to miss this like younger age. And two, like, this is so fun. And like, it would be so fun to do this like for our own, but there was a moment in us swinging the other way of me thinking like, if any one of our nieces and nephews truly had a strong reaction to us saying, Auntie Katie is going to be a mommy one day, and they were like, absolutely not. My husband and I are like, we might actually like reconsider this. Our nieces and nephews play such a pivotal role in our lives that we were like, if we choose this journey of parenthood, does it take away from what we've added to their lives? Because I think it's similar again to kind of what Peggy was saying, this like one and done idea. It's like, if you choose to have a second, what does your first child stand to gain or lose? Right. And there's this equation. And I think for us, it was similar. If and when we choose this parenthood journey, does it take away from the richness that we add to our nieces and nephews' lives? Because that's something I don't want to take away. I'd like to think it's an experience that really enriches their lives and ours, and I would hate to take that away from them. And I don't want to take that away from us either.
There's also this other thing, I guess, like as they're getting older, they're also a little more independent, right? And they gain different circles, and they are finding themselves and their groups of friends at schools. And yeah, parents and adult figures take a little bit more of a backstage. It's a sad reality as we watch our kids grow up, but maybe like you're saying, you feel like you could do that now. You'd have that time to do that now with maybe your own, right? Yeah. So what kind of led to, I know you were talking about, biologic clock, right? What kind of was the thought process leading up to choosing adoption as your path to having children?
I mean, when my husband and I revisited this topic, we were like, well, like we knew the biology, like I would never house a baby in this body. And so that was immediately like off the table, not happening. And then we were like, well, there's always like IVF, there's also like surrogacy, there's all these other routes. And as we kind of looked into those, we were like, the one thing that doesn't take away is there's still the hormonal changes, right? Surrogacy, there's still like the egg retrieval involved and all of that. And when we really looked into it and thought about it, we were like, that's actually the part of the equation that we want removed, is as much as we can, right? And that's not to say that when we become parents that there isn't going to be mental health challenges there. There potentially will be, but if we kind of stack the cards a little bit more in our favor, this is kind of what we're choosing to do, is we don't want to add the risk of, oh, well, Katie's going to have to go through like postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression, and like manage the hormonal changes on top of still managing lack of sleep and getting to know this new human that now lives with you and depends on you and needs you, right? And then also this new dynamic in your marriage of this adding this third person into it. And so that was really ultimately what led us to the idea of adoption. And this journey is all of the other options that would be on the table still require me to do a lot of the physical and the hormonal work. It's not really that hard on my husband, any of those paths. It's the baby making process. There's not too much of hormonal changes that they have to go through, and so when we kind of evaluated all of our options, we were like, adoption seems like the right path. And I think at the same time, social media pushed a lot of content that I was seeing that was like adoption. There were a lot of influencers and momfluencers that I was kind of popping up on my feed that had, created their family through adoption, or they were adoptees and things like that. So kind of hearing those stories, reading those stories, and doing some of that research, I think really only propelled us in this direction more so.
I know that adoption is like, for one, we haven't been able to talk about that on the podcast, which is exciting because there's so much about it that we as in Jasmine and me necessarily know about, and maybe a bunch of our listeners, but we know there's people in your shoes who are like, maybe they've tried IVF, maybe they've tried all these other things and they're still struggling to have children. And so there's probably just so much about it that we don't really know about, and no, like how to even get started. And maybe even you with someone who's been a PANK for so long to be like, oh my gosh, suddenly adoption is on the table. Where do you even begin? How did you even, like, what is that process like? And what has been most surprising during this process? And then I have a couple of follow-up questions to that one, because unpacking the whole adoption process is probably big. But starting with where'd you get started?
There's a lot to unpack. We started with our good friend Google and Instagram. And even there is so much information out there. And also there's like misinformation. And then there's a lot of the information that's people's individual lived experiences that aren't necessarily just truths. They're just like my experience or Jasmine's experience or Peggy's experience. And while those aren't not truth, they're not true for all things. For us, it started with a lot of Googling. It started with like, what are the costs? What are the timelines? What are the requirements? Because we didn't know. We were like, well, do you need to have like X amount of bedrooms? Is there like a bedroom per capita requirement? Is there like a dollar amount requirement? Is there like a requirement on how long you've been married, how old you are? There's all these interesting requirements out there, right, that we didn't know. And then the biggest question that we really had to answer and do some soul searching on is, do we want our child to look like us? And that is, when you make a biological child, your child's going to come out looking like you. maybe a combination, maybe one or the other, but it's gonna come out looking like you. But when you choose adoption, you don't get to guarantee that, and I'm Taiwanese American, my husband's Korean American, so we're both East Asian. And so where we started our journey is we were like, it'd be really cool if our child looked like us. So then we actually, when we kind of initially started this journey, we looked into international adoptions and very quickly ruled that out. I think within the first like 2 conversations we had with folks in the adoption industry. And we were like, nope, this is not for us, and quickly had to like revamp. And it was really disheartening. And I think for me, it was more shocking. There was a little bit of grief in that, in recognizing that in this journey that I'm choosing, it is very unlikely I will end up with a child that looks like me. And there was some unexpected grief in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think with that, and I love that you touched upon that piece, because I think with what's called like transracial adoptions, and a lot of times in media, you see it's usually a white adoptive family with a child of color. There's so much to unpack even there. And you hear a lot of stories of adoptees that are international with their white parents, of like wanting to know more about their cultural heritage. There's also that myth of color blindness, where a lot of white parents are adopting children of color, of like, but we don't see color, you're a family. But that's not true. You're always going to look different. And how do you raise a family honoring that and teaching your child about where they come from? And so for you and your husband to be very, again, intentional is like the theme of your journey, I feel like, and all the decisions we're making is making these decisions, but also, yeah, there's those barriers. Do you mind just sharing what some of the barriers are with some of the international adoption? Just because I know that there's a lot of people, even my neighbor just went through an international adoption process. They're Indian American, they're adopting from India, and it took them 3 years. So I'd love to hear just like your experience of like why you're like shutting the door on the East Asian adoption piece.
Mm-hmm. So for one, it was like the timeline. The wait time of between being, and this is like a lot of new terminology I'm also learning, between like passing your like home study and like your initial kind of beginning process to being matched, to being able to like meet your child, to then being finalized and actually being able to bring your child home. That entire process could take anywhere between like 2 to 5 years. And I was like, I can't do that. That's too much in limbo for me to, and then the worst part, I think for me, the hardest part for me, I shouldn't say the worst, the hardest part for me was after talking to multiple international adoption agencies, they were saying like, once you're matched with a child and, you're set to adopt this child becomes like, would become your family member. There's anywhere between 18 months to 36 months before you can bring that child home.
Wow. Why?
And I was like, and it's just like the international law. There's paperwork from like the country you're adopting from. There's paperwork you have to do in like the United States. And then there's like UN laws, and there's like passport processing, birth certificate. There's just all this like bureaucracy. Right.
Wow.
And that was, I think, my hard drop on it was, I can't be emotionally attached to a child and come to love this child and not be able to actually connect with this child for another 2 years or 3 years. Like we could, hypothetically match with a child when they're 3 or 4 and then not bring them home until they're in elementary school. Like that blows my mind. Right. And that was something both my husband and I were like, that's not something we can set ourselves up for. It's just too hard. And then the other piece for us was we really want to adopt an infant. And that's kind of the only net we're casting, is we want to bring home a baby. And when you do international adoptions, that's much less likely, because within every country, they try to, they'll do a domestic adoption. And if that doesn't go through, they try to do like a familial adoption. And if that doesn't go through, then international adoption is kind of the next route. And by the time they get to that route, a child's usually already in that like late toddlerhood or early school ages. And then you fast forward another like 2 to 3 years after that. By the time you bring a child home, they're already in like mid-childhood, and that was when my husband and I talked about it. The piece I enjoy the most are these early years. And that's, for me, was like a non-negotiable. I refused to miss out on these early years. And so that quickly ruled out international adoption for us. And the other piece that also ruled it out was a lot of children that you adopt internationally have medical needs. And my husband and I, we just don't think we're equipped to handle lifelong medical needs. I think there's a huge financial burden there. There's a huge emotional burden there. We've just been really honest with ourselves that that's just not something that we feel like we're prepared to take on, while we also take on parenthood.
Yeah. As heartbreaking as that can be, that makes a lot of sense why there's so much red tape and bureaucracy, because it's crossing country borders. There's just a lot to go on there. I had done some volunteer work with like a anti-trafficking organization in Thailand. They rescue a lot of kids out of trafficking and they have them in these orphanages in Thailand, but they are very adamant as a country and a government not to adopt out Thai children. They try to keep them within Thailand, which makes sense for all these other reasons, especially these kids who have been trafficked. Not that that's necessarily what's going on when people are seeking international adoption, but I can see why there's just so much, like when you mentioned the UN and all this, I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot that there's all these other, this is cross country, like cross borders of like, you're getting a human and that is a big deal. But I also can see why that can be so hard when you're like, well, what is it like I'm assuming now you're looking into domestic adoption is there ways to say like, I have a preference for an East Asian child? I mean, it sounds weird to ask that, but I can see also you would give that child the best chance of growing up in their culture versus someone who is not East Asian when it comes to adoption. What are some of those cultural considerations when you come, maybe now let's talk about domestic adoption in that process.
I will say we've had to do a lot of soul searching as we've kind of embarked on this journey and learning that just because we say no to something or we have a preference to something doesn't make us bad people. We've had to really reframe that and reframe it as we're making a decision to allow us to be the best parents that we possibly can and to provide like the best home environment for whatever child we choose to bring into our family. And as you kind of go through the adoption process, they'll ask you some pretty pointed questions like, do you have race and ethnicity preferences? And some people do. We actually don't. So as we're kind of filling out our paperwork, we're open to any race and any ethnicity. And with a lot of expectant moms, sometimes they are not sure of the race or the ethnicity of the baby. Like they're only sure of their own. They're not sure of like the biological dads. So you sometimes don't even fully have that information when you're kind of going through this process. As you go through like the adoption process, you can kind of have a preference for just about anything under the sun. You can have a preference for race and ethnicity, like I mentioned. You can have a preference for sex of the baby. You can have a preference for age of the baby. You can have preference for like what states you want to adopt in and out of. You can have preference for just about anything like medical needs, etc. It has felt really weird because it feels like we're kind of like handpicking a baby in some ways, but also not, because you are often matched with an expectant mother who hasn't had a baby yet. So you're also not handpicking the baby because you don't really know. Right? You're oftentimes just meeting the expectant mom. You're not meeting the biological dad of this baby.
So when you say you're meeting the expectant mom, have you guys looked at open versus, and I don't know, it's been so long since I've learned anything about adoption. Is this an open adoption, closed adoption? Are those still things that people talk about?
Yeah, that is a really good question. I could be wrong on this in what I'm about to state, but I believe the industry of adoption right now pushes for open adoptions across the board. And the openness of adoptions, from what I've learned, kind of ranges. It can be like you're checking in, like as an adoptive family and the birth mom, you're checking in like once a quarter. You could be checking in every month. You could be, you could have a relationship where if you're ever in each other's towns, you're meeting up for coffee and lunch. If you live close together, the birth mom is attending like dance recitals and birthday parties and school events. You could also have it be as open as you're only checking in once a year and you're sending a holiday card. And from what I've learned and from everyone we've kind of talked to, birth moms, we've talked to adoptive moms, we've talked to social workers, we've kind of talked to, I think, every cog in this well-oiled machine. It really ends up being what is most comfortable for both the adoptive family and the birth mom. And it also ebbs and flows with life. You sometimes have birth moms who are in situations where they don't have secure housing, or there's substance abuse involved. And then your kind of communication will rise and fall depending on kind of where in their life they are. You also sometimes will have birth moms who are really, really young, maybe like 19, 20, and they are feeling really hopeful and have this, I would love an open adoption. And then as they age and they, might land themselves in a secure relationship and then start a family, and then it kind of drops off. So it kind of is all over the place, but it's definitely not closed the way we see it on like Law and Order SVU, when like the child turns 18 and you can like open this magical file with, your like birth mom's information. And it's the culture of adoption is, from what we're seeing, is really not like that anymore. It's really supportive of allowing the child to kind of know where they're coming from. I think a lot of adopted children are children of multiple cultures, right? They have their birth culture and then their adoptive family culture. And it's challenging. I can only imagine how challenging it is to navigate multiple cultures. And this culture of adoption now is allowing children to have all of the information that they need and not having to wait until this like magic number of 18 to find out this information.
Or wait until they do a 23andMe and they're like, here's my family.
Exactly.
Yeah. Are you able to set some boundaries, parameters and limits though? Okay. So it's not like free for all.
Yeah. No, it's not a free for all. And there's, generally, I don't want to say terms and conditions, but those are kind of the first words that come to mind. There are definitely kind of guidelines that you set as a partnership. And I really want to think of, we're being encouraged to think of this as a partnership, and it is a partnership. And so there are some kind of guidelines you set as a partner, and those guidelines can evolve as time changes and as life goes on. And we've been advised that oftentimes birth moms want a lot of updates in the early years, especially during those first years, because some really exciting milestones happen in those first 12 months, right? And then as they get older, those milestones are kind of fewer and far between. They're harder to measure, right? And so your updates and your communication kind of falls to the wayside a little bit. And so, yes, there are guidelines, and those guidelines are not permanent. Just because we set them at the time of the birth doesn't mean that these are the parameters that we have to follow for the rest of our lives.
It's like an evolving relationship, which is good. Yeah. It sounds a lot like maybe like you're saying, adoption culture, right? Like like I hear like my coworkers say, oh yeah, my neighbors adopted like a kid from China, like, but this was like, how long ago. Their child's now like, about to graduate high school. But I'm sure it was maybe easier to adopt internationally back then versus now. It seems a lot harder. And then the other big elephant in the room is that, you hear adoption can be very expensive. Like I hear that it can be just as expensive as IVF. And I mean, this whole process you're talking about now, you're picking certain things, right? That sounds a little bit like IVF too. You can kind of choose the gender you want, right? In a way, it is a little bit like that. Well, I hope you don't mind, but I'm sure our listeners are curious. Do you mind sharing some rough costs of the adoption process that you've discovered in your journey and research?
I will preface with, my husband and I have joked that this is why we will be eating ramen for the next 10 years of our lives, because we are choosing parenthood and it only gets more expensive from here. And I want to preface this by saying that I know I'm speaking from a place of privilege. The fact that we are even able to choose this route and make this intentional decision, we are sitting at a place of privilege. I want to recognize that. We are sitting at a place where he and I have the choice to say, we want to do this and we want to allocate X dollar amount to this. And we are able to make concessions in other parts of our lives to make this work. And I recognize that not every person and not every couple and not every family has the ability to make that choice, which I think is really unfortunate in a whole nother segment. We are choosing a little bit of an unconventional route. And I know this might be a hot take, but we signed with a consulting agency. So they are an adoption consultant agency. And those were added costs that we chose. And that was, I want to say, about $5,000. And it covers us from like the beginning of our process all the way to what we call finalization. And finalization is when after you've already brought the baby home, the judge says this baby is legally yours. You get a new birth certificate with your name on it, and it is yours. So that whole process, and that, and this consultant agency has given us guidelines to kind of who they would recommend to help do our home study. They send us like cases of expectant moms, and then we choose if we want to present to this expectant mom or if we choose not to present to the expectant mom, and all of the information remains confidential. So the information that's shared with us about expectant mom stays confidential. The information that we're sharing with the expectant mom stays confidential there too. And kind of the examples of the information that they share is, when is the expectant mom's due date, the expectant mom's kind of height, weight, ethnicity, any information on the birth or on the biological that they would have. Are there any other pregnancies or children in the expectant mom's lives? And then do they know the gender of the baby? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And also we know sonograms can be wrong. So you can't put your eggs in that basket. And then it also discloses any like prenatal like history. Was there like drug use? Was there incarceration? Like, et cetera, et cetera. And then also a key piece of information is, why is the expectant mom choosing adoption for her? Sometimes they're just not in a financial place. Sometimes they don't feel like they're in a healthy relationship. Like what the reasons kind of run the gamut, right? And so we signed with a consultant agency, and there also another key piece that our consultant agency is helping us with is what we call a profile book. And it is exactly what you think it is. It is like a dating profile, but you are pretty much dating expectant moms. And my husband and I never online dated. So this is like a brand new thing for us. We are trying to sell ourselves with some pictures and like little blurbs about us. And they help us essentially put together this like profile book that highlights who we are as individuals, who we are as a couple. And then for us, we also want to highlight who we are as like a PANK and a PUNK, because that's such a huge part of who we are. And then essentially it's like a little book, and it looks like, I want to say, like a yearbook, like a elementary school yearbook, and it gets presented to the expectant mom, and the expectant mom is presented with, I'm sure multiple sets, and then they can choose anybody in this pile, or they can say, none of these stand out to me. I want to go through this process again. So yeah, so the first cost is we tacked on was the consultant cost, and then there's costs for like a home study, which is about between $3,000 to $5,000. And that's all of these costs at this point have only gotten you the piece of paper that says you are approved to start the process of adoption. That hasn't even gotten you to anywhere else. And then when you are matched with a mom, we're an expectant mom, there's a dollar amount associated with each case. And the dollar amounts range from $40,000 to $70,000 to $80,000. I know. And those, and the dollar amounts range for a lot of reasons. One, there's like agency fees when you're adopting through adoption agencies. The agencies have a fee, and different agencies have, some of them are calculated on percentages, some of them are flat fees, etc. And then it also depends on how far along the expectant mom is in her pregnancy. But the further along she is, sometimes there's less cost because you have less things to take care of. Sometimes you are asked to help take care of her living expenses. Sometimes you're asked to take care of some of her medical expenses, some of her transportation to medical appointments, and things like that. So it runs the gamut. What we've been told is that to expect all of this to be about $65,000 to $75,000 when all is said and done. And that's not including like travel. So if you are adopting out of state, you also need to consider like you're likely booking last minute flights, you're likely booking a hotel or an Airbnb for upwards of like 2 weeks to 4 weeks. And then, all of your like food costs and return flights, attorney fees, all of that. So by no means is adoption like an easy way out or a cheap way out. We've quickly realized that it adds up very quickly.
Thank you for sharing that, because I feel like some people might just be like, yeah, well, you could always adopt. But like when people throw that out there, I'm just like, do you realize what that comes with? The emotional things, the price tag, it's a huge thing. Like you can't just tell people like, oh, you could always adopt. No, I don't think so. I don't think it's for everyone.
Yeah. And sometimes the birth mom, I think there's a certain window, and correct me if I'm wrong, where they legally can say, I no longer want to have my child adopted out.
It varies state to state, and we've learned this. And I know it is. I mean, I could sit on a soapbox now, and I don't even think I've learned everything I possibly could about adoption culture, but knowing what we know now, my husband and I are like, I can see being huge advocates, because it's like, the system is so incredibly broken and convoluted. Like there are so many things that can be recalibrated in the system to make it more conducive to every aspect of this triangle, right? It's not really benefiting anyone in the best way. Yeah. So there are certain states where the birth mom can sign her relinquishment of parental rights as soon as she is medically discharged from the hospital. Okay. And there are some states when she signs that piece of paper and her name goes on the dotted line, it is irrevocable from that minute on. And then there are some states where after she signs, there is a period of time where she could change her mind. And that period of time, are you ready for the kicker? Ranges from 15 to 75 days.
Wow. Gosh, imagine bringing home the baby.
I know. And then
never mind.
75 days. Yeah.
Do you even get your money back? Like my mind is like blowing up right now.
No. So there is, with every adoption case, there is a dollar amount that you are at risk for. And most agencies will cap it at a certain dollar amount. It's like $5,000 or $10,000. It's by no means a small amount, but they still cap it. Like losing $10,000 feels better than losing $50,000. So they do cap it, but there is, beyond the financial risk, there's a huge emotional risk in this. An expectant mom could change her mind and choose to parent a child, and that's great. There's so many potential hiccups that could happen. I know there are some states, a lot of states actually, if the expectant mom at the hospital while giving birth tests positive for any sort of substances, she legally has to relinquish the rights, because there's like the ramifications, like you're not fit to parent because you've tested positive for narcotics or like whatever it is. So there is that kind of side clause. But yeah, so there is, and then after the parental rights are relinquished, then we take, I don't want to say custody, but we would take the child, and then we would have to stay, assuming it's an out-of-state adoption, we would have to stay in the state until we pass something called ICPC. And I can't quite remember what the abbreviation stands for, but it essentially clears us to travel like across state borders with the infant. So we'd have to stay in whatever state we are adopting from until we clear that with a judge before we can like bring a baby home.
I mean, I'm just thinking about logistics, right? You don't know how long that's going to take. You both have jobs. Like, this is a big undertaking. And I think you've told to me before also, it could just be like, oh, by the way, like you're matched. Tomorrow is the day you go. And you don't have any sort of head leeway that like this is happening now. You can't plan in advance for this.
Yeah, you really can't. And I mean, I'm sure you both know, like babies don't always come on their due dates. Sometimes they come early. Sometimes they come a lot earlier than you expect. So you could be given like a due date of, December 14th, and then get a call like November 1st that like your expectant mom has gone into labor. You need to be on the next flight out. Meet us at XYZ hospital. So there's some kind of best practices we've been told, like once we're matched, to not plan any travel 6 to 8 weeks before the like projected due date, to kind of have a go bag packed, ready to go at a drop of a dime, to have all of our like paternity and maternity leave paperwork like lined up so that that could technically kick in, because it's like the adoptive rules. It could technically kick in as soon as we leave. There's just like, there's some best practices. So we've actually unconventionally already told both of our jobs that we are starting this process, just to give like our jobs a heads up to know that this process could happen really quickly, could also take a while, but to allow everyone to be prepared.
And you are currently in just the home study portion of this whole journey right now, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we're going to have to have a follow-up after your baby comes home.
It'll be really exciting. We've actually are just starting to tell people that we are doing this. And funny story is, when we started telling people, we were just dropping it like really casually, like, oh, what's new to you? Oh, we started the adoption process as we're like eating food. And our friends started crying, and we were like, oh, this is big. This is the equivalent of like a pregnancy announcement. Oh, we should not just drop this bomb on people
while you're eating ramen.
Yeah, exactly. Because for us, I think when we hadn't realized this, like he and I had been thinking about this for so long already that it didn't feel like news to us. But as we're breaking the news to like our closest friends and our family, it's like huge. It's life-changing for them. And so we are like, okay, we actually have to, we've like started recording us telling people, and it's been, it took us a couple of tries to realize that this is like news. This isn't just like, oh, I have a new job. Oh, we're moving. This is like really big news.
Okay, those are big news too. But when you told me, I was also like, oh my God, and like screaming internally, right? So it is like a pregnancy announcement, right? And I'm glad you get to sort of share a little bit in that joy, right? Because you aren't doing this unconventionally, but you still get to, you still deserve to have some of that excitement from the people in your life.
And the hundreds of listeners that are now also excited for you.
Hopefully excited. We've lovingly and endearingly coined this baby Thought Baby. They don't have a name because it's like a thought, right? So one of our friends has like named it Thought Baby and abbreviated to TB, which they're like, oh, fits perfectly because you love Taco Bell. And I was like, I do love Taco Bell. So, yes.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing so intimately all of these details on this journey. I do want to just plug one disclaimer, though, that like earlier you were talking about how choosing the adoption path kind of removes some of that hormonal, stuff. And you also said, very clearly, like by no means does it mean it's going to be easy and there might not be emotional things. I do want to point out that some people do get what's called, I want to say, correct me, Peggy, if I'm wrong, is it post-adoption depression syndrome, PADS. So this is also a thing. And I hope you never get this, Katy. But I do want to put it out to our listeners that like just by choosing this route doesn't remove the possibility or, make you immune to the fact that you may possibly experience some postpartum mood changes and mental health shifts. So I just want to be mindful and put that out there. But I really feel like, a lot of this was great information, I think. It's really hard to find people who talk so openly about all the details. So really, really thank you, Katy, for sharing this part of your journey. And we may have to get you on to hear the other side of it when you're done with the process. But it's kind of exciting to hear about it right now in the beginning of the journey too.
I think especially for folks that are listening that are in the similar boat or are maybe in a different boat where their conception journey has been really difficult and they are still really adamant about exploring their options. So I appreciate you also giving a voice to people who are not there yet and wanting to find those options. To wrap up, we have just one question for you. In light of, healing our inner tigresses, what advice would you give to your past self in whichever iteration of your past self you'd like, whether it's the past self that was deep in the depression, the past self who was like gung-ho PANK, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give past Katy?
Oh, I would give past Katy the advice that nothing's ever set in stone and that like everything's fluid. Everything continues to move forward and everything is always changing. And that is literally the only constant is change. And I think that has been a really hard lesson for me to learn and, kind of stomach. And that by proxy of the fact that change is the only constant, you can never be perfect. As my therapist calls me, I am a perfectionist in recovery. So
we
always
all are.
working on that. Yes. Yes.
I love that. Those are great words to live by. And hindsight's always 2020, and you're only going to keep getting better and stronger as you go forward. We're very excited for you on this journey and really can't wait to hear the rest of it going forward.
I will keep you guys updated. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Healing the Tigress. The more we share these stories, the more we can help other AAPI mothers and partners. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to keep supporting this mission, please hit the subscribe button to the show and take a few seconds to leave a rating. An extra big thanks if you would also leave a review to boost our show visibility and help other AAPI folks find us.
You can also follow us on Instagram at Healing the Tigress, or even better, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/healingthetigress-podcast to support us more. Inside the Patreon, we will be offering more bonus episodes, sneak peeks, and a community for you to help shape our podcast too. Thanks for being here.
Healing the Tigress is produced and edited by Peggy and Jasmine.
Music for this show is remixed by Dr. Tony Huynh of Tony Mixes.
Our intro music is a cover of You and Me by Z Avi, played by our co-host Peggy.
Our outro music is a cover of Green Island Serenade, played by Jasmine's sister.
Cover art design is by Dr. Angela Chung.